Something peculiar is happening in a major city in England, and I'm quite sure that I'm being blocked from making it public. I'm Haley Bennett, a relatively successful freelance journalist, and I moved to this city a couple years back. I cover any local story that takes my interest. When my dad was still alive, he was successful in the industry, so I have firm connections to multiple publications that regularly publish my reports, articles, and interviews. Some are national, some local. In this industry, it's not what you know, it's who you know. And my dad gave me a great entrance into a journalistic freedom that not many get to experience. So I was extremely shocked when I was turned down by 5 of my go-to editors when I pitched them the article I am about to share with you. Because something that is this out of the ordinary happening in the home of Europe's top colleges is newsworthy. It's rare that my pitches are turned down, but when they are, I am always given excellent feedback about why. This time, I have just been told no. There has been no explanation, no advice, no spec to work towards. Something is going on. I'm sure of it. Maybe I'm a bit paranoid, but I have decided to put the article out myself while I continue my investigation. I don't feel comfortable being the only one pushing for this to go public. In my 12 years in this profession, I have learned to trust my instinct. And something feels off here. This seems the safest platform for it, at least while I gather more evidence. I am having to keep the name of the city secret for legal reasons. I hope that those of you who read this will get the same uneasy feeling that I have from everything that's happened so far. Editor to include headline. An unexpected influx of mathematicians and scientists has left the residents of city redacted, baffled, after access to the city was temporarily restricted to allow for a mysterious mass arrival that brought the center to a standstill. Following nearby airports closing for several hours at 9 p.m. on Wednesday, city redacted. Smaller private airports had a flurry of private planes arriving throughout the night. An anonymous source who works for the airport told, publication to be added once article is sold, exclusively that there were private planes arriving at all hours. We usually see 1 or 2 every couple of days. We're a small airport, but there were so many arrivals, more than I've ever seen. More than any of my co-workers had ever seen too. We're talking about 15 planes in one night. They were all full of people too. The passengers had to state their occupation after landing, and most seemed to be mathematics and science professors. They were from all over the world. Someone must have known it was happening, because the entire staff were told last month to be prepared to be in on Wednesday night. We weren't told why, and we definitely didn't expect anything like that. We suspected they'd just have us painting the floors or something. The following morning, Thursday 16th of August, up to 50 police cars arrived at the center between 7:30 a.m. and 8:30 a.m. To achieve the high number of police presence, police officers had to have been brought in from other countries, as the local police force only has 38 police officers due to cuts. The police quickly evacuated the center, with cyclists, tourists, and shop owners directed to the outskirts. It was then cordoned off to ensure nobody unauthorized would re-enter Central City redacted. Following that, traffic was stopped all over the city. Then a large number of private plate cars, whose passengers were protected from view by privacy glass, were seen driving towards the areas that the public had been forced to leave. Disgruntled independent bookshop owner Eva Morgan was amongst many locals to witness the arrival. They shot past the direction of the airport. Without a doubt, they were breaking the speed limit. There must have been a couple every minute, at an accurate enough guess. It went on for an hour, so in total, I lost 2 hours of business. Not that the police care about that, of course. As soon as the cars finished entering the center, the cordon was swiftly lifted, and those that had been evacuated were directed back to resume normality. However, tourists were disappointed to find a major attraction, college redacted. Library was closed off to the public, and remained so at the time of print. It wasn't only tourists and business owners that were affected. Dr. Raman Elwood, organizer of annual invite-only history event Life History, told, publication to be added once article is sold. I've been organizing this wonderful event for 3 years now. Hard fought for funding has allowed us to hire various venues across the city in order to host our convention, which includes lectures, seminars, and workshops. Now, Just mere days before, I've been told that the whole thing has to be cancelled until further notice because they need the venues for more urgent business. Life history may have been a relatively new event, but I have 200 attendees and 50 history academics due to arrive. And now I need to tell them that it's not happening. It's completely outrageous that I cannot even give them a reason. Those responsible for this abomination should expect to hear from our solicitors. Other than life history, no public or private seminars are scheduled in or around the city for the following 2 weeks. So the reason behind the arrival of some of the world's brightest minds remains a mystery. As it stands, city police have not responded to any requests for statements. The unexpected cancellation of what is fast becoming one of the world's most popular history events was preceded by an abrupt cancellation of City Redacted, Loved and Cherished Astronomy Open Evening in March. Held at the city's historical telescope and open to the public, astronomy enthusiasts were gobsmacked earlier this year when Dr. Madden emotionally kicked out attendees halfway through the session, as previously reported by Haley Bennett. Do you have something to share? Contact Haley Bennett at haleybennett@.co.uk. I know I'm not exactly the world's best journalist, but I know a story when I see one, and trust me, this is a story. I'm pasting in the article mentioned above, written when the people who run the public astronomy evenings totally lost their minds and kicked everyone out. Thursday 8th March 2018. City Redacted. Astronomers to end public open evenings after shock cancellation. Local astronomy enthusiasts were left out in the cold on Wednesday evening when they were abruptly ejected from the popular astronomy open evening held at city's historical telescope in what eyewitnesses have described as a surreal night. Lecturer Dr. Madden, 31, allegedly ended the institute's public session on the lawn outside city's historical telescope 30 minutes early, insisting that everybody leave the area immediately. The public had been listening to a short lecture by Dr. Madden and were due to go inside and use the telescope, guided by members of the institute. An unnamed elderly colleague, described as having a German accent, is thought to have triggered the early dismissal. It is claimed that he became hysterical in the small building that houses the famous telescope and was heard from the outside by members of the public crying out, screaming for help, and saying, "It's happening, my God, it's happening." An audience of less than 30 attended Dr. Madden's public lecture, which was much less than the average 90 to 100 attendees. This was perhaps due to the unusual bitter weather experienced in City Redacted this week. Mr. Lewis Wright, who was at the public talk with his 12-year-old son, said, "It was all very unexpected. We have attended most open evenings this winter, and they've been professional, but fun. To hear a member of the program having some sort of hysterical meltdown was upsetting. He kept crying out, shouting, 'It's happening.' It was clear he needed help." Following the commotion, Dr. Madden is said to have urged her audience to stay calm before making her way in to attend her distressed colleague. Within minutes, she returned and instructed the entire party to leave. Local amateur astronomer Joanne O'Brien described the scene in more detail. "I heard him crying out for a while before anyone else seemed to notice. I didn't want to interrupt the lecture because it really wasn't very clear what was going on. But then he started screaming out for help. He sounded terrified. I thought he must be having a stroke or a heart attack. Dr. Madden went into him and was back out within 5 minutes. When she came back, she just told us all we needed to leave the grounds. A couple of us asked if she wanted us to stay and help, but she absolutely insisted we left straight away. She was pale as a ghost. In fact, she looked terrified herself. It was a surreal night, to say the least. Even as we were walking away, we could still hear him screaming out. He was shouting, 'My God, it's happening,' over and over again. I tried to contact the institute when I got home because I was concerned, but the phone line was engaged all evening and nobody responded online." When we contacted for a statement, Dr. Madden sent the following. "On Wednesday 7th of March, my colleague, who will remain anonymous, experienced health concerns during a public lecture. Some of those attending may have heard his distress, and I am sure they can understand why I made the decision to end the session early. Fortunately, my colleague simply had a minor health scare and is, thankfully, now well again. Though the Institute's open evenings are scheduled to continue until the end of the month, my team and I made the decision to end them with immediate effect. We apologize for any inconvenience. The early closure came as a shock to locals, many of whom regularly attend the open evenings held by the Astronomy Institute. They were not due to end for the summer until the end of March. When we pushed for reasoning behind the decision to end 3 full weeks early, Dr. Madden declined to comment further. It is currently unknown if they will restart at the beginning of next winter. Do you have something to share? Contact Haley Bennett at haleybennett@.co.uk. It might seem like a loose link to the reader, but I've got a growing suspicion that it's relevant. There's more to it that I'm able to write in the article, and I think I might be about to break something big. You see, the anonymous airport source is an ex-boyfriend of mine. When you're a journalist, it's always good to have an ex who works somewhere useful and hangs from your every word. When all the plane full of geniuses were landing, guess who was the one greeting them all? The one and only Dr. Madden. And apparently, she still looked like she'd just seen a ghost. Maybe that's just her face. Or maybe there's something really funny going on here. I've got some leads to follow anyway. Back in March, when Dr. Madden shut down the telescope open evenings from the public, I chased her about it like a hound dog, but she kept totally silent. At the time, I thought they must have been shutting early because of a funding scandal that I could break. But she was too tough to crack, so I let it go. Perhaps naively. I fell hook, line, and sinker for the story about the Yale colleague, so I never tried to interview him. In hindsight, who the hell screams, "My God, it's happening," when they are having a bit of a funny turn? I've got a few questions for him. I've still got 2 more editors to contact to, who I can try and get to publish my article. One of them is a good friend of mine with a weak publication, but a weak publication is better than no publication. For now, I'm going to get some sleep. I'll update when I know more. Quite a lot has happened since I posted last. First off, I need to warn you not to panic after reading this post. Some of it is shocking. However, I urge you to remember that I'm still investigating this in depth, and it's still extremely important not to jump to conclusions until we have all the information that's out there. I'll jump in now and get you up to speed. I sent my most recent article that I shared with you to my final 2 contacts. I received some really strange messages from them in response. I copied them so I could post them here. My first attempt was a senior editor whom I had trained under when I first started out in journalism. He took a distasteful liking to me, if you know what I mean. So in general, I avoid approaching him unless desperate. We exchanged the following messages. 7:31 a.m. H. Bennett. Hi Joel, hope all is well. Sending along a pitch, let me know what you think. 7:32 a.m. H. Bennett uploaded a document. 7:55 a.m. J. Hughes. Hello Haley. Sorry gorgeous, but I'm going to have to say no to this one. I've heard from above that we're not touching anything to do with this. 7:56 a.m. H. Bennett. Who's above you? 7:59 a.m. J. Hughes. The people who pump in the big money, keeping our site ad-free, unlike that shite you were published on a few weeks back. 8 a.m. H. Bennett. Ah, so the people who buy your readers' votes then. Thanks for nothing. Do you care to at least elaborate why everyone is refusing this article? J. Hughes has left the conversation. 8 a.m. J. Hughes. Haley, it is important that you drop whatever it is you think you're chasing, immediately. It's a non-story, and you're severely damaging the reputation your father passed down to you. If you ever want to publish anything again, then you will let this go. That might not seem like that weird of a message to you. It didn't really to me at first either. However, shortly after speaking to Joel, I messaged my final contact. Michael Hansen. Hansen is a good friend of mine from my uni days. He's an editor of an independent online publication that has a low but loyal following. Our message exchange was extremely weird. 8:45 a.m. H. Bennett. Hiya, handsome. I'm sending you an article. Let me know. H. Bennett uploaded a document. 9:30 a.m. M. Hansen. Hi, Bennett. 9:30 a.m. H. Bennett. You took your time. 9:34 a.m. M. Hansen. Yeah, I know. Listen, who have you pissed off this time? 9:35 a.m. H. Bennett. Who haven't I pissed off? Why do you ask? What's going on? 9:36 a.m. M. Hansen. I was told not to accept any articles from you for the next 3 months. 9:37 a.m. H. Bennett. That doesn't exactly surprise me. Something weird is going on. 3 months seems a bit harsh though. Anyway, you're independent for fuck's sake. Who can tell you not to publish me? 9:38 a.m. M. Hansen. Outside the publication. Legal. I don't even know if I can talk about it. So. 9:40 a.m. H. Bennett. Legal? Okay, this is all getting a bit out of hand. I need to talk to you properly about it all. I think I'm onto something. I'm not entirely sure what yet. Maybe we should work together. Can we meet? M. Hansen has left the conversation. 9:40 a.m. M. Hansen. No, Haley, you need to drop whatever you're going after. It isn't going anywhere, and it's making people angry. It looks like you won't be being published anywhere ever again if you carry this on. Your career will be over. Drop it. Something felt off when I was messaging my first contact. But after reading Hansen's messages, I knew that something was really messed up. Both of my connection had gone offline before immediately sending a suspiciously similar long message warning me off my story. No users typing notifications either. They just appeared instantaneously. It was like they had been copied and pasted in as soon as they left the conversation. And another thing, I've known Hansen since I was 18 years old. In 12 years, he has never, ever called me Haley. I honestly can't remember a single time in all the years I've known him that he's called me anything but Bennett. He is Handsome Hansen. I am Bennett. The more I think about it, the more I am sure that someone hacked into those messages as soon as the conversation went into an area they, whoever they might be, didn't want me to drift into. Now, on to the really important stuff. You'll have to forgive me for not giving you this information straight away. It seems huge, and perhaps more relevant to the focus of the entire investigation. The thing is, I have very little evidence that is reputable, so I'm remaining open-minded while I continue my investigation, and I hope you do the same. Now, let's get down to it. I managed to track down the German colleague of Dr. Madden with ease. I basically had to look up the people in the astrophysics department who are affiliated with the Astronomy Institute. There weren't many names to go through really, and one in particular stood out. Professor Gardner. A quick search online told me that he is an 86-year-old fellow at the most famous college in the city, right on my doorstep. Likely to be of German origin, works with the Astronomy Institute's opening evenings. It seemed the right lead to follow. Unfortunately, you can't just waltz into the ground of this particular famous college and start knocking on the doors of the fellows. So, I had to get a bit sneaky. I waited until night and then managed to slip quietly into the locked back gate after a resident had entered the code. It was surprisingly easy, though I did have to wait for quite a while until someone was entering, as most students are home for the summer. Anyway, I had reached the courtyard within minutes, and because it was late evening, the place was pretty much deserted. I crept around the edge of the perfect lawns, resisting my childlike temptation to step on the grass. Thankfully, it didn't take too long to find what I was looking for. One of the many stone archways that hide the steep wooden steps that led to the residences of only the most respected academics of the college finally jumped out as relevant, because this particular one had 4 names on gold plaques, and one jumped out. Doctor. Professor. And lastly, Professor Bernd Gardner. Bingo. Of course, he had to be right at the top, meaning I'd have to tiptoe past 3 other doors. I crept around the spiraling staircase. The silence seemed to cover the entire college, meaning that every creak my steps made echoed all around me. I was sure that one of the doors would burst open and an angry old professor would corner me. But somehow, I got to Professor Bernd Gardner's residence without being stopped. I knocked on the door as quietly as I could. Too quietly, perhaps, because after a minute, there still had been no answer. I knocked louder, each thump making my heart hammer in my chest. I waited for 2 minutes, and when there was still no response, I found myself horrendously disappointed. I turned and started back down the staircase, bitterly accepting that I was back to square one. When I heard the door open behind me. "What do you want?" An old, papery voice whispered, the German accent evident. I turned and saw a small, slim man with wide eyes on the round spectacles, peering at me. "Professor Bernd Gardner?" I replied. I managed to keep my tone low, but my excitement made a whisper impossible. I didn't wait for him to answer. I was too eager to jump right in. "I'm Haley Bennett. I'm a local writer." "I've been told not to speak with you," he interrupted. I frowned and got ready to fight my corner. However, as I opened my mouth to protest, he opened his door fully and disappeared inside. I followed, my adrenaline buzzing. Closing the door behind me, within seconds I found myself sitting opposite an academically famous astrophysicist as he smoked a pipe and drank port. And so began a very confusing, and in parts, creepy chat with Professor Gardner, who was indeed the man who caused the commotion at the telescope tower in March. So, reader, hold on tight, because here is my journalistic interpretation of our conversation. There are some pretty huge claims in here, but don't let that bypass the fact that there is a glaring lack of detailed information. Remember, keep a critically open mind. Headline to be included by editor. A theoretical astrophysicist with more than 70 years experience has claimed that a cosmic event that could potentially destroy a chunk of the solar system is imminent. Professor Bernd Gardner, 86, a college redacted fellow, has spent a total of 58 years studying a theory that suggests that a specific cosmic event could cause extreme damage to the part of the solar system that houses Earth. Gardner and his research partner, the late Professor Karl, developed the theory in the mid-1950s. After a great number of years investigating, in March 2018, Gardner claims to have witnessed an astronomical anomaly during an open evening held by City Redacted Astronomy Institute. According to Gardner, his finding suggests that their theory was not only accurate, but fast approaching. Gardner spoke to reporter Haley Bennett in an exclusive interview for Editor to include headline. He explained that in 1955, "We proposed that a particular cosmic event could, in very unique circumstances, really damage the chunk of our solar system that houses Earth. The circumstances were so unique and unlikely that we did not receive fundings to take our workings further, but in our spare time, we pursued it over the years. In the late 1960s, a military satellite picked up on an event that astronomers struggled to explain for many years. However, my research partner and I strongly believe that the event was related to our original theory. In the scenario that the event was indeed related to our theory, then that meant our predictions were a lot more likely than we first believed. We pushed for a team of scientists, but were refused. However, we were given generous positions in our field and able to dedicate our full working time to it." When Gardner's research partner died in 2002, Gardner made the huge decision to cease work on their theory due to the enormity of their scientific investigation becoming too overwhelming in his partner's absence. At that point in their research, the cosmic event they had theorized still seemed unlikely to happen. In Gardner's opinion at the time, it did not justify ongoing scrutiny, a decision he later came to regret. Deciding to work in other areas of astrophysics, Gardner nestled into the background of City Redacted. One of his responsibilities was setting up the city's historical telescope for Astronomy Institute open evenings. In March 2018, Gardner was setting up the telescope ready for public use when he made a shocking discovery. I observed a phenomenon that meant that mine and my partner's theory was much more accurate than we had ever anticipated. Frighteningly so. When asked to elaborate on what this could mean for humanity, Gardner told publication to be added when article is sold. Damage to the planet Earth that will be so severe that humanity will cease to exist appears imminent. It seems likely that we're all going to burn. Although much information is needed in order to provide an assessment of whether Gardner's claims are credible, they have the potential to be extremely concerning. Gardner's claims have come to light following an unexpected influx of mathematicians and scientists in City Redacted, as previously reported by Haley Bennett. When contacted for more information, City Redacted, Center of Experimental Astrophysics, declined to comment. Do you have something to share? Contact Haley Bennett at haleybennett@.co.uk. I don't pretend that I'm a scientific journalist, so my report on what the professor told me is extremely basic. Though, to be honest, everything he told me was clearly a watered-down version of what he knows, or believes he knows, at least. Before you lose your minds and start planning for the end of the world, I'm going to suggest you take a breather. The article you have just read is absolutely full of holes, and that is certainly not my choice. I just didn't get a lot of solid information out of Professor Gardner. I'm not totally sure he's trustworthy, and on a personal level, he was a bit weird. Don't get me wrong, he seems like a really nice man. He's exceptionally intelligent and clearly knows his stuff. But there was something off with the whole meet. For example, right after he said we were all going to burn, he drifted off into a sort of catatonic state and just shut down from me. I literally could not get him to talk to me again after his whole big reveal. I thought he might be ill. He carried on smoking a pipe and drinking port. I guess he just wanted to freeze me out. Anyway, it was odd. I left him a card with my details on, but I doubt I'll hear from him. I'm not saying that what he told me was necessarily incorrect or untrue, but I am saying that it's important to be cautious and not to jump to conclusions. There is more investigating to do before we can create any of our own theories. Unfortunately, I can't even look into the papers he published on his theory for verification. Not only because they're all behind a paywall, but also I simply wouldn't be able to understand his work. Currently, with such a lack of evidence, I'm not even going to bother pitching this article to anyone, because I know where it will get me. Laughed out of my career. I'm keeping it close though, while I continue investigating. Next, I plan on heading to some of the venues that the life history event had booked but lost. I suspect I might see some of the mathematicians and scientists that were flown in. Maybe I can get some of them to talk. Oh, and before I sign off, one more thing happened that was weird. In the morning, hours before my weird message exchanges with my journalist connections, I took an early morning walk. On my way past one of our incredibly famous landmarks, I saw that someone had graffitied on it. Now, we have crimes and problems in the city, just like every other place. Not that long ago, someone threw actual human feces at a police officer. And a couple years back, one of the rich students burned a 20-pound note in front of a homeless person. The point I'm trying to get across is that we do get some nasty people here, but to see graffiti on a building that is so historically important to the city is unheard of. My instinct is telling me it has something to do with all the crazy stuff happening here. It was red writing that someone had painted specifically so it would appear that blood was dripping from the letters. I hadn't taken my phone out with me, which is a real shame because it was actually quite beautiful. Luckily, I had a pen and a small notepad in my pocket, so I was able to jot it down. It read, "When the pound drops, it has begun." I walked back past the site of the vandalism many hours later, on my way back from talking to Professor Gardner. It had been painted over. There was no sign that anything had ever been there. I'll update you on everything as soon as I know more. I spent the majority of the day hanging around various venues around the city. Most of the places that Life History had booked were large seminar-style rooms that I couldn't gain access to because they were inside university buildings. I stood at the main entrance of various buildings at the beginning and end of the booking times, hoping to see a large group arriving or leaving. I knew it was a long shot though, because these buildings have tons of exits. Still, I tried with 3 different venues on the off chance it would pay off. I didn't witness anything out of the ordinary. All I saw were everyday types making their way in and out. It was relatively quiet due to the students being off for the summer, so I'm fairly certain I didn't miss any large groups of academics. That didn't mean they hadn't been inside. It just meant I didn't have decent enough access. I had expected that though. The one venue I had real hopes for was the theater. Life History had booked it for 3 hours in the afternoon, and it had a capacity of over 1,800. There were only 2 exits and entrances, and they were both easily accessible to the public. An hour before the event was booked, I arrived at the multi-story car park opposite the theater with a decision to make. Should I simply try and question attendees, or should I try and gain entrance to the event? If those attending were who I expected them to be, the mathematicians and scientists that had entered the city just days before, then it would be quite obvious. Large groups of academics usually have a pretty specific style. Smart, casual clothes, quiet and thoughtful actions, middle-class behaviors. It would be very different from the crowds who attended the typical shows held at the theater, such as comedians, bands and plays. There is a distinctive difference between the actions of people attending a work conference and those attending a recreational activity. I knew all the door staff who worked for the theater, as I attended regularly, and I always made a habit of making connections with as many local faces as possible. I was fairly confident I could talk my way into the event. Unfortunately, I was blocked almost as soon as I made the decision to go for it. Just 10 minutes after I arrived at my stakeout position, multiple cars pulled up outside the theater people, and lots of people in black suits surrounded the theater, promptly blocking off access. These were not the usual doormen. They were all more heavily built, and they seemed much more aware of their surroundings. It was very professional and serious security. I stayed where I was. I watched as a slow trickle of smartly dressed middle-aged men and women finally started coming down the street. They all paused in front of the guest door staff, who promptly searched them. I found that very odd, as they don't usually search guests. I watched as their tickets were taken from them by the security staff and scanned by a handheld machine. Then the guests were ushered quickly inside. Before long, the trickle had turned into a swarm. I was sure that these were the mathematicians and scientists who had entered the city, and probably many who already worked and resided here. I would estimate that around 500 people were attending the conference, which, particularly on short notice, is big. When it was nearing the time the event was supposed to begin, I decided to try my luck with asking attendees for interviews. Something about the way they approached the theater told me I would hit a brick wall. They didn't seem to be distracted by any of the historical buildings that surrounded it. None of them seemed to be popping into the famous pub just beside the venue for a swift lunchtime pint. This was definitely not a casual afternoon out. They were like a line of ants, walking methodically to their destination. I had to at least try and talk to them though, so I made my way down the concrete steps to the exit of the car park. When I opened the door that led onto the street, I jumped out of my skin when I physically bumped into one of the security staff, who may as well have been a brick wall. He just stood in the doorway facing me, as though he had been waiting for me to come out. His face held no readable emotion. When I tried to get past, he stood firm, and though I wasn't particularly intimidated by it, I was extremely irritated. He eventually moved aside. However, by that time, there were only a few stragglers left running into the theater. It wasn't a suitable situation to ask any questions. I muttered a passive-aggressive, "Thanks a lot," and made my way onto the street, disappointed and grumpy. I went into the pub next to the theater and waited for 3.5 hours. I wandered out onto the street a few times, and I was surprised to find I could hear shouting coming from inside the theater. Sometimes I walk past at night and hear applause or laughter when a show was on. But this was a bunch of angry people all shouting about different things at once. I couldn't distinguish anything they said, but it was interesting all the same. When they eventually left, they all spilled out and left in various directions. The security staff didn't try and keep me from them this time, so I waited on the street as the attendees passed around me. They barely noticed my presence. There wasn't any excited chatter nor any shouting like I heard from the inside. Instead, they all walked in an eerie silence with desolate looks set on their faces. I tried to call out quick-fire questions to a few of them, but they all ignored me. Within 10 minutes, most people were gone, and that's when Dr. Madden emerged from inside. She stood at the top of the steps to the theater and put her face into her hands. She was obviously stressed out about something. On instinct, I ran up to the steps to talk to her, but before I could get near her, one of the door staff threw out an arm and my chest collided with it. I was winded by his action and doubled over to try and catch my breath. He didn't offer to help me. I don't think he even looked at me. A moment later, I felt gentle hands touching my shoulders. It was Dr. Madden, and she guided me up the steps into the theater. Another security person approached me, perhaps to search me. He stopped dead when she snapped at him, authoritatively. "She can come in. Don't touch her." She led me into a side room and got me a drink of water. After a quick swig, I pulled off my backpack, placing it on the table between us. "I'm going to record this," I informed her, pressing the record button immediately, still panting a little. "Oh, and thank you for your help," I remembered to add. To my surprise, rather than shut down and ask me to leave, Dr. Madden laughed resignedly, waving her hand nonchalantly at the dictaphone and gesturing for us both to sit down. Here's a transcribe of our conversation. "I haven't seen you for quite a while, Miss Bennett. I was starting to think you had given up. I'm sorry for the way you were manhandled out there. They seem to have no sense of decorum. Are you okay?" "Yeah, I'm fine. Thank you again for your help." "You're welcome. Now, regarding what we discuss here in this room, I want to make it clear that nothing that you record will be published. You can try all you want, but no one with any reputation will go anywhere near any of this. And I can't promise to answer all your questions. I'm open to a short conversation though. So, what is it that you want to know, Miss Bennett?" "Firstly, what was the conference held here today about?" "A number of things. Optical afterglows and relativistic blast waves, for example." "Why were the experts that attended the seminar shouting?" "There was a heated debate, let's call it, on the moral obligation of scientists." "Why were so many mathematicians and scientists flown into City redacted
earlier this week?" "They're working on a large project that requires many different experts from various fields of science." "Is this project related to Professor Gardner's discovery at the telescope in March?" "Have you spoken to Professor Gardner, Miss Bennett?" "Are you able to answer the question, Dr. Madden?" "I'm going to have to insist you turn off the recording device if you would like me to discuss Bernd."
I did as she asked, because I knew from experience that Dr. Madden was prone to total silence when talking to local press, and I didn't want to push my luck. I was amazed that I even got her to talk in the first place. I had to show her that I was willing to cooperate with her, so I didn't scupper any future chance of correspondence. She basically explained to me that Professor Gardner has Alzheimer's, and that he has been showing signs of getting increasingly confused. She told me that he had worked on a theory an incredibly long time that, yes, was related to the project she had spoken of. In his old age, she told me, he was struggling to distinguish some of the wilder and/or earlier aspects of his theory from parts that are currently relevant. I really did not want to ask if humanity was at risk. I mean, after what she had explained, I really felt that something so far-fetched must be preposterous. Professor Gardner being ill made total sense, especially when I thought about how odd he had acted when I had met him. I was worried that if I gave Dr. Madden the impression that I was a potential conspiracy theorist, it might push her into shutting down on me. However, I took a deep breath and asked anyway, because even if it wasn't the end of the world as we know it, there was definitely something major happening, and I had to get to the bottom of it somehow. One thing I will certainly give Dr. Madden great credit for. She has an excellent poker face. She neither burst out laughing at my question, nor did she turn grave and foreboding. She looked at me for what felt like forever, with a total unreadable expression. Then, she smiled sadly and tilted her head to the side, taking a deep breath. Though I'm paraphrasing, the following is quite accurate. She said, "Something is in motion in this city, Miss Bennett, that will lead to a colossal change to the future of mankind. Whether it is a change that is for better or for worse, well, quite simply, we do not yet know. In order to discover this, the magnificent collection of minds that have gathered here must be allowed to decide on a plan of research and action. In order to do this, we need time. We simply cannot allow the press to jump to false conclusions, because we are working on a very complex subject, and even a minor misunderstanding could cause absolute mayhem. You've been locked out from reporting on this for a very good reason. We need to be able to work in order to give humanity the best chance. So please, Miss Bennett, let us do our jobs." Yes, she had an excellent poker face. And I'll tell you something. She made a huge mistake when she stopped using it. Maybe I would have sympathized with her if she had remained expressionless, if she allowed me to draw my own conclusions instead of attempting to lead me to them. When she plastered that sad smile on her face, when she forced a stance and a sigh, it changed the entire way I perceived her break plea for me to back off. Without that smile, I might have listened. Instead, she tried to manipulate me. She must have thought I was a fool if she thought I was going to fall for that. Well, I could play that game too, and I was better than her at it. I smiled back and nodded my head understandingly, not verbally agreeing with her plea, but hopefully leaving her with the impression that I had fallen for her bad acting. I left the room not long after, declining Dr. Madden's offer to walk me out, and instead leaving her alone behind me. Another bad move on her behalf, because instead of going to the exit, I slipped into the theater. Just an hour before, it had been full of academics who had apparently been attempting to give humanity the best chance. I knew I only had moments in here. If Madden came out and saw me, I would, without a doubt, sever any ties we now had, and she would know, without a doubt, that I hadn't fallen for her charade. My eyes scanned the room. There was nothing there that particularly stood out from afar, so I jogged up the aisles and glanced down each row of seats. I heard footsteps approaching the main entrance into the auditorium, so I crouched down behind the closest row to me, hidden from sight. The sound of heels clipping the wooden floor echoed around me as my heart hammered in my chest. I didn't breathe until I heard the footsteps retreating back the way they came from. I stood up quickly, ready to make a speedy exit. However, now that I was facing the stage, I could see there was a large blackboard covered in smeared chalk. Whoever had rubbed the contents away had missed the bottom right-hand corner though. And I could see that it said 320 billion pounds. I didn't stick around to think about it, instead jogging quietly up to the far end of the auditorium, which I knew led to the second quieter exit. To my relief, I managed to get out of there without bumping into anyone, So I think the security people must have already left. Thinking about everything that Dr. Madden told me, I have to wonder how much of what she said was true. If I'm honest, as I was interviewing her, I got close to dropping the entire story. Journalists like me reporting on areas of science can have devastating consequences. That might seem dramatic, but if you report on something scientific incorrectly, then it can lead to some problems such as mass information and hysteria. I was strongly considering just leaving all of the experts to get on with it, then watching them bring in actual science reporters and just playing witness to the aftermath. But she tried to manipulate me. Because of that, I know that there is something here for me to chase. What is she trying to hide? And what about the value written on the chalkboard? 320 billion pounds. That's an absolutely absurd amount of money. The richest man in the world only has 120 billion pounds. Why was that figure written there? Well, it's safe to assume that I will not be dropping this story. While I'm still getting leads thrown into my lap, I'm going to keep chasing them. And talking about having leads thrown into my lap, just a minute ago, I watched a grumpy old college porter push an envelope through my door. Inside was a handwritten note from Professor Gardner inviting me to meet with him this evening. I'll update you when I have more. Professor Gardner is dead. I'm in total shock. And he's not the only one. He was one of the 4 deaths in the city yesterday. I don't know what's going on here. It's so hard to fit the pieces of this puzzle together. I just want to go to bed and put this all behind me. But I need to write it all down first, so I can try to make sense of it when I'm a little more with it. I went to Professor Gardner yesterday evening, not long after receiving his note. As I was there by invite this time, I didn't have to sneak in. I was able to go into the college via the main entrance. The porter was expecting me, and he led me up to the professor's residence. I didn't bother saying that I already knew the way, partly because I wasn't keen on revealing I already been there, but also because it's good to make connections with as many people as possible. Porters know everything going around the colleges. The porter was an older man whose knees creaked as he walked, though compared to the professor, I suppose he felt like a spring chicken. He knocked on Gardner's door quietly, and when there was no response, he called out, "Haley Bennett is here, as expected, Professor." When there was still no response, the porter knocked louder. But the professor would not be opening his door ever again. I'm sure that the porter broke protocol, because he got out his own set of keys and unlocked Gardner's door while I still stood behind him. I think I knew then that something serious was wrong. The concern etched on his face, the jangle of the keys and clunk of the lock echoing around the staircase. There was a feeling of foreboding, and when the porter pushed open the door, sure enough, Professor Gardner was slumped over his desk. The porter cried out, "Burned!" and rushed over, shaking him gently. He was limp. After a quick check for a pulse, I was surprised to see the porter's eyes fill with tears. He looked at me almost apologetically as I fumbled around with my phone, preparing to ring the emergency services. "I've worked for Bert for a very long time," he murmured. "Now, he's gone." While we waited for an ambulance, I looked around the professor's living area. The porter told me he had delivered his nightly half bottle of port to his door just an hour before. Everything in the room seemed much as it had on my previous visit, from what I could tell. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. Maybe I was just trying to keep busy so I didn't have to stare at the cadaver of an old man. Or maybe I wanted to avoid awkward small talk with the porter. I know that at 86 years old, when suffering from Alzheimer's, it isn't unlikely that you will pass away. Still, I couldn't help but feel that something was off here. Perhaps it was a total coincidence that he died just before I was due to meet him. Or maybe there was more to it. Was anything different this evening? I asked the porter. He looked at me confused. Any unexpected stresses? I added, so as not to imply anything was off. The porter shook his head. All was as usual. His port arrived a little earlier than expected. I think that was more of a treat than a stress though. I glanced at the bottle on the table. There was a fancy bowl discarded to the side of it. And sure enough, there was a half-empty glass next to the professor's body. The bottle had a quarter left. I did something I'm only slightly ashamed of. I pretended to become overwhelmed by the situation, letting fake tears spill down my cheeks. The porter looked terrified. I spluttered for him to give me some tissues, and when he had disappeared into another room, I quickly slipped the bottle of port into my bag. It was a big risk. If the porter noticed, then I would really struggle to explain my actions. At the same time, it was all I could think to do. This would be closed immediately. The professor's age and health completely pointed to natural causes. I knew it wouldn't be further investigated. Perhaps rightly so, but I had to do something. Once the ambulance arrived, I made my exit and started to walk home. If the porter had noticed, he hadn't said anything. I was still shocked by the outcome of the evening and needed something to take the edge off. So I went to a bar for a couple of drinks. As I sat in a corner alone, I went online on my phone and ordered a drink testing kit for drugs, paying extra so that it would arrive tomorrow. I thought it was unlikely that I would find anything in Gardner's port, particularly something an amateur kid could detect, but I needed to rule it out. After placing the order, I put my phone away and paid some attention to my surroundings. The mood was somber in the bar. Nobody played the piano. There wasn't a bustle of chatter. Even the bar staff seemed distant. I drank my pint, then went up for another. As the bartender poured it, I asked her why it was so quiet. She shook her head and looked around before dropping her voice, barely above a whisper. There's been a suicide. A nasty one. She had a glint in her eyes that told me she was excited to share the morbid gossip. Someone jumped from the clock tower. They're saying it was a scientist. She didn't know anything else. I drank my second pint quickly, then decided to go and check out the clock tower myself. It wasn't surprising to hear of a suicide in the city, in all honesty. With so many people here under so much pressure, there is a surprisingly high suicide rate among students and academics alike. However, to jump from a historical landmark wasn't typical. When I got there, the police were spraying down the pavement underneath the clock tower. There were a couple of people hanging around, and I stood behind them so the police attending wouldn't spot me. Most of the local force recognized me, and I knew they'd tell me to leave straight away. I shuddered as I watched the red water trickling down the gutters into the drain, chunks of clay carried in its flow. I was pleased that the body had already been removed, because I was still shook up over Professor Gardner, though the remains that were floating away left little to the imagination. I looked up at the clock tower, so intimidatingly tall, like all the buildings around here. There was no doubt what your fate would be if you fell from such a height. How could somebody just step out, knowing that in a couple seconds they would be splattered all over the ground so far beneath them? I considered trying to get to the top of the clock tower, but I'm not entirely reckless. Plus, police had taped it off, and it's such a small area that there wouldn't be any sneaking past them. Moments later, a stream of sirens screamed their way past us. 3 police cars, an ambulance, and an emergency responder car soared past in the direction of the other side of the city. A police officer close by to me said something into her radio, and almost straight away, a muffled voice spoke back to her. I didn't understand what they had said. It was mainly in a numbered code that I didn't know. But I watched the police officer look at her colleague, and he promptly turned off the sprayer. Surprise and concern swept over her paling face. "Another 2 suicides?" she said, a question rather than a statement. She had forgotten there were spectators around, and as the onlookers near me gasped, she realized her mistake. Her paling face even more so. I stepped through the small crowd, pulling out my press card. "Officer, can you explain what has happened here tonight?" I said, my even and flat tone hiding the fear I felt inside. Well, that was the end of that. I was greeted by a wall of no comment and ordered to leave or be arrested. I shrugged as I walked away. "I'm just doing my job," I called over my shoulder, then walked in the direction the emergency services had sped. The area was cordoned off a lot further than the clock tower had been, presumably because the bodies had not yet been removed. I couldn't see a thing, but I knew the building above and around me was a biomedic center, strictly only accessible by those who worked there. There was a woman crying nearby, being confronted by a paramedic. She had a blanket around her shoulders and was sipping a steaming drink. "I was just walking along," she said, with a hint of hysteria in her voice. "Then they both landed right in front of me." She erupted in tears. I walked around the edge of the cordon, trying to see if I could find anything out. It was dark and a little out of the center, so there weren't many onlookers. I saw 2 people not too far away that, judging by their body language, were having a heated argument. I wasn't getting much from the rest of my surroundings, so I decided to turn on my dictaphone and sneak up close enough to record them, but where I was mainly hidden from their side. It was a lucky but a good decision. I peered around and saw that the couple having the argument were 2 men. One that looked in his early 20s and a middle-aged balding man. They were both dressed in expensive-looking black tie suits. I soon discovered they are father and son. Here's what I caught from their agitated conversation, with M1 being the younger one and M2 being the older one. M1:
"Is this what it's going to be like? Those involved jumping off buildings left, right, and center."
M2:
"Keep your voice down. You're being very unrestrained. These ones were weak, but there are many more who are prepared to do what it takes."
M1:
"But why does it have to take so many deaths? How can this possibly be the right way?"
M2:
"It's the only way, and you know it."
M1:
"You seem to think that every little thing LaRue says is the only way, Father. Do you not have a spine of your own?"
I heard the crack of slap across skin, and the voices abruptly stopped. I popped my head around the corner and saw the younger man storming quickly in my direction, the redness of one cheek telling me he had just been struck by his dad. Thankfully, he was too distressed to notice how close I was stood, and I slipped back into the shadows before I drew any more attention to myself. He had a mass of eccentric black hair and a frenzied look in his eye. I wanted to follow him, but the older man ran after him just a moment later, grabbing him forcefully by the arm and dragging him towards the road where there was a car waiting. Black paint job, blacked out windows, and private plates. They sped off. There was little else to see at the scene of the suicides. The cordons still hadn't been lifted, and the police refused to comment, telling me to have some respect and wait for the families to make statements. They kept telling me to leave, but the area they had taped off was large enough for me to just go over to the other end, where I wouldn't be noticed for a while. They didn't take my being there too seriously really, so I stuck around for 2 more hours. From what little I had been able to pick up on, it was 2 scientists who had jumped to their deaths. So it seems that 3 scientists jumped from tall buildings in the same night. And Professor Gardner was dead too. As if I needed any more drama that night, I found another piece of artistic vandalism on the wall of a building on my way home. It was the early hours of the morning by this time, a couple hours earlier than I'd seen the last piece when I had been taking an early morning walk. That one had read, "When the pound drops, it has begun." The new one was painted on a different building from the last, and though both buildings were equally historical, they held no link. The center of the city isn't a massive place, so it wasn't surprising that I spotted it. I just needed to be out and about and get a glimpse. I wondered if I had missed one the night before. The new one had the same dripping blood design, and it chillingly made me think of the suicide victim's blood washing away down the drains into the city sewers. This one read, "The children of the rich will be taken first." Does that make sense to you? Neither of the messages make any sense to me. I'll openly admit it. I thought about it all the way home, and though I could not decipher the mysterious messages, they did tell me one very important thing. Someone in the city wants to speak out. I need to find out who. I came close to hitting a dead end when we found Gardner's body. However, the conversation between the father and son that I had overheard outside the biochemistry laboratories has given me a new lead. The name LaRue rang a bell, and when I got home, I looked it up. It took a little while for me to find out what I was looking for, but after some digging, I remembered where I had heard the name. Christopher LaRue. I briefly investigated him when I thought there was a funding scandal going on after Dr. Madden shut down the open evenings. Shortly after his closure, he donated a large undisclosed sum of money. He's a billionaire CEO of a large private space company. I can't name the name of it here, because there's no way I'm getting involved with his lawyers. Let's call them BOS, and I'll hope that isn't too much to give the company away. He's quite a private person, so it's hard to find information online unless you know where to look. I have just spent a long time looking through the profiles of people he works with directly. I eventually found that one of his colleagues posted on their social media that she is in the city, this city, working on some real exciting stuff. That may well indicate that LaRue is here too. Of course, I can't be sure that the CEO of BOS is the same LaRue that the arguing father and son were talking about. I could be clutching at straws. I do feel like it seems likely though, because the links are quite strong. As it stands, I'm not really sure what to do with this information. So for now, I'm going to sleep on it. And we'll see what tomorrow brings. I'll post again when I know more. Yesterday evening, I took a late nap, then headed out onto the streets of the city. I planned out a route that would ensure I would pass all major buildings in the center in a reasonable amount of time. I did this for the majority of the night, repeating a loop around the city. My aim was to catch the mysterious graffiti artist in the act. I have gone over and over the messages, and it makes such little sense to me. I really think I just need to talk to him. Or her. I appreciate the ideas that those of you following my investigation have offered about what they might mean, because I've been stumped. It was a long night, that's for sure. The level of artwork in the previous messages told me that they hadn't been some quick scrawl on the wall job. A lot of talent and passion had been poured into the blood that dripped from every letter. It had clearly taken a bit of time, so I'm quite sure that if the artist had been preparing a new message as I walked around the city, then I would have seen them at some point. However, I didn't catch so much as a glimpse of the mystery artist. I have to admit that I was very disheartened and disappointed, because the story was going cold, and an interview or even a new message to try and understand was just what I needed. Things don't always work out the way we want them to though. As dawn broke, I headed home and sent off an email to an Australian science journalist that I have loose connections to. I probably would have given it a miss, because it's a bit embarrassing reaching out like that. But during my long evening, as I racked my brain for connections, I remembered that she had written quite an extensive piece on Christopher LaRue, the CEO of the private space company BOS, some time ago. In my email, I gave her a rather brief explanation of everything that has happened. I kept in mind that someone had potentially hacked my messages when I had previously tried to reach out to other journalists, so I tried to keep things vague. At this point, I'm not sure who is watching me, I got some sleep. But in the early hours of the afternoon, I woke to something being pushed through my letterbox. I stumbled out of bed and ripped open a small parcel. It was the drug test strips that I had ordered yesterday. Grabbing a glass from my cupboard, I filled it with the port from the bottle I had taken from Professor Gardner's residence. It was a long shot. I know it. You know it. So you can imagine my total surprise when the test indicated that there had indeed been drugs inside the port. It tested positive for ketamine. I don't know much about the drug myself, but a quick bit of research told me that it is an odorless and colorless tranquilizer and that it can be deadly when mixed with alcohol. I thought about going to the police. Of course I did. I weighed up the pros and cons of the possible outcomes from sharing this information with the local enforcement. Through me presenting this evidence, an autopsy would surely be ordered on Professor Gardner's body that would eventually lead to his real cause of death. However, what evidence did I actually have? I had taken a bottle from the professor's residence. My fingerprints were all over it. They might draw the conclusion that I had put the drug into the bottle and taken it to cover my tracks. Irregardless of whatever stance the police may have taken, I believed that there was a big possibility that Dr. Madden would hear if I informed them about what I knew. Then, she would be aware that I was investigating Professor Gardner's death. If she knew I had gone to meet him, and if she found out I had taken something from his room, well, she would know for certain that I hadn't fell for a play act in the theater. As things were clearly getting dangerous, and she seemed to be some sort of lead in whatever this was, I decided to keep the poison port to myself. I had already exposed myself more than I wanted to by emailing my Australian connection, so there already was a chance that Dr. Madden might know I was still looking into everything. So I wasn't about to potentially let myself get locked in a prison cell. I know a couple of the readers following my investigation have warned me that I might be in danger. I too feel that I'm only safe while I'm not a threat. And I truly believe that if I presented this evidence, then I would suddenly become a hazard in whatever war truth was going on behind the closed doors of Dr. Madden and her associates. I did decide to contact the police about something else though. The deaths of 4 scientists in the city should have been very big news, and I hadn't seen it reported anywhere. I rang the liaison officer that I work with when I report anything crime related, and she told me that nothing was being reported until further notice, but that an official statement would be released in due time. All she would give me was that it was presumed to be 3 suicides and 1 death of natural causes. Now, the silence here from the police isn't entirely unusual. There are strict protocols you have to follow when it comes to reporting a death. In my professional opinion, the silence surrounding this suggests to me that these deaths are being treated as criminal cases, meaning any news pieces could potentially damage future trials. Or that news reports are being blocked by someone above, for unknown reasons. I could have whisked up a quick article, keeping the names of those who died anonymous. I didn't want to though. I feel uncomfortable reporting that the deaths are presumed to be 3 suicides and 1 of natural causes. I have evidence that Professor Gardner's death might actually be a murder, so I'm not going to put my name on an article that suggests otherwise. However, I also feel uncomfortable about putting a spin on the report of deaths. You know, like suggesting to my readers that there might be more to this than meets the eye. The problem with that is that some family members might read it, and I do not want to be responsible for causing them more pain than they already are going through. That's not my style. I decided to get out of the house for a bit. I walked into the center and drifted in and out of a few shops. I picked up a copy of a best-selling book from a few years back, a poetic and unique novella about grief. Taking it to the counter, I scrawled a quick note on a card that offered my condolences in my name and number. I asked the cashier to gift wrap it. Then I made my way to the college where Professor Gardner had resided. While I had been walking the streets the night before, I had thought a lot about the porter with whom I had shared the discovery of the professor's body. The tears that had filled his eyes, the slight tremor in his hands, the wobble in his voice. He had been very upset about the professor's passing, and I felt ashamed of myself for not even asking his name. You see a lot of insignificant people in the city. There are so many who function as servants to the rich, and they spend their life almost without their own persona. And I was ashamed at myself for not even considering what he was going through, for not even thinking to ask his name. I left the wrap gift with a different porter, who assured me he would get the gift to Thomas as soon as he was able to. I felt a little better. We make mistakes in life, and that's fine, but we must always do our best to rectify them if we can. At home, I checked my email. I was surprised to see my connection in Australia had emailed me back so quickly, since I hadn't spoken to her in a long time. I've copied in her email for you to read. Remember, I didn't give her all the details, just the bare minimum. Oh, and she curses quite a bit. Sorry. Hi Haley, it's been a while. What a messed up situation you're in. Sorry to hear that your work's being blocked. Hope I can help you get that sorted. We all need to earn a living. So, I looked into the announcements from around the time that you think this Professor Gardner made a discovery. It hasn't been locked anywhere that I can see, but that doesn't mean he didn't see something. Sometimes, they just keep this stuff local for a while, until they have further evidence. One person seeing something doesn't really mean a lot, especially if they didn't manage to get any data on it. It's just my opinion, but I think you might be barking up the wrong tree. If anything big is happening, it's pretty unlikely that a collection of top mathematicians and scientists will be keeping quiet. They want their research shared far and wide so they get more research grants that let them continue their work. Just like we want our articles being shared far and wide so we get more articles published. I guess, if we're talking about the end of the world, maybe they'd keep quiet so not to cause anarchy or something. LOL. But trust me, chick, I've written enough how the world might be end-style articles to know that it's not happening. Not for a long time. And it wouldn't be one big event, it'd be a collection of lots of little shitty ones. Climate change probably being the main trigger. Talking about climate change, that leads me to one of your questions. Christopher LaRue. Yeah, I know a fair bit about him. So, straight off, he's a complete dickhead. Total psychopath. I won't go on about that. I'll just get straight to your points. You might have been able to go with an article intended to rustle up some hysteria based on what's going on in City Redacted and LaRue's current top secret project. BOS has been building a spaceship capable of further and faster space travel than ever before. And the tech he's using is top secret, real innovative stuff. Thing is though, he started working on it a couple years ago. So you couldn't make the link between that and what's going on right now in any future articles. Whispers on the street are that this ship is the answer to how we'll survive past climate change. A long time in the future, but not as long as you think. I don't know if you've got kids, but if you have, then they may well be boarding it. I'm not entirely sure why all your regular journals aren't panicking about that end of the world scenario, but whatever. The funny messages you send me sound like a load of bollocks to me. Sorry mate, just sounds like you've got a pissed off student on your hands, decorating the streets with shitty poetry. Probably an ambitious English lit student. LOL. I can't see any link between the messages and anything scientific. Let me know if there's anything else I can help you with. I might not agree with your direction, but it sucks to be blocked. I had it myself last year. It was that bastard LaRue, after I wrote that bio piece on him. I wasn't published anywhere for 6 months afterwards. Nearly lost my house. He's scum. Let me know if I can help you with anything else, okay? I do respect my Australian contact. She's good at her job. I don't think she's right about this though. The thing is, she isn't here in the city, is she? She hasn't got the feel of the streets. I couldn't give her all the details either, so she's drawn a conclusion based on a basic summary I presented to her. I spotted a bit of a link between our situation that she didn't. So she was blocked from being published by LaRue, which caused her to become so financially crippled that she almost lost her house. I've been blocked too, though I don't have any firm evidence that LaRue is behind it. It's seeming more and more likely. Dr. Madden might be powerful, but I can guarantee she wouldn't have the power to block the press from pursuing a hot story. That would take serious money. Most of the time, even if the press are breaking the law, Then they'll print something anyway and just remove it once it's had enough use, issuing a rubbish apology at a later date. Blocking everything that has been going on here will have taken serious influence and serious money, both of which LaRue has. I've got to sign off now, because I'm heading out onto the streets again tonight. The mystery graffiti artist is my best lead, and I think I've spotted a small pattern in his work. One night on, one night off, one night on, one night off. So tonight, will he be on? Let's find out. As before, I'll post when I know more.